Hello and welcome to Best Practices in Design. My name is Melissa. I'm our Senior Director of Success here at SoGoSurvey, and I work with a lot of people who are designing surveys or would like to be designing surveys and projects. This webinar, this session is really based on the power of design, the importance of design in your processes. If you start with a bad design, the rest of your project will falter and fail, unfortunately, is the case. So making those good decisions, taking the time at the very beginning to make sure that you're thinking through the entire process cannot be overstated how important that is. Otherwise, you're ending up with useless data, a waste of time and resources, which none of us have extra of generally, and unfortunately losing trust capital with your audience as well too. So please do prioritize design, and that's what we're here to talk about today. First of all, we'll start with please don't. Unfortunately, there are, like I said, lots and lots of worst practices that we see. So we're starting with what to avoid. We will come into, of course, positive things as well too. But unfortunately, when you're creating a survey and you have some unusual decisions along the way, unfortunately, that creates a significant impression with your participants. So think about this. When your survey includes no introduction or welcome, the impression that that creates generally is that you're starting a conversation very abruptly. It's a really great way to get people started, to say, hello, welcome, this is what this is about, set expectations. Think about what you would do in a conversation. So when you don't have an intro or welcome, creates a negative impact from the very beginning. An unclear purpose, unfortunately, if you don't know what your purpose is, your participants are likely to be unclear. And if there's no reason for them to participate or no reason they can understand, they simply won't. Too many mandatory questions, very pushy, forcing people to answer things, it is more likely to see your response rates drop. It's one of the most common errors that I see is people saying, well, I need all of that information. Well, you probably want a lot of it, but really reducing it to the bare minimum number of mandatory questions is a really great, smart move. Also, too many questions in general. You are relying on the goodwill of your participants in many cases to participate, of course, to respond, to get the whole way through and submit their answers. If you have too many questions, you make it harder for them to reach that goal. Also, very many personal questions, especially at the very beginning. Who are you? What is your age? How much money do you make? You wouldn't walk up to someone and ask those kinds of questions. How educated are you? How much do you weigh? How tall are you? These are very questions that can seem useful for your data, but can be very invasive. So making sure that you are very often including them in the end of the project and the end of your questionnaire. If you aren't able to pre-fill them, think about the order in which you're introducing them and really reduce the number of questions. If it's too invasive and you wouldn't want to answer it in a face-to-face conversation, it probably can't be justified in this situation either. Also, questions that are irrelevant. It goes back to the idea of purpose. If you have questions that are sort of just a little bit out of left field, as it were, drop them. They need to be focused. Also, incorrect question types, again, with mandatory questions and too many questions, incorrect question type is one of the most common issues that we see. The classic, I'm asking a single select question, but I'm giving people the opportunity to give multiple answers. If it's a checkbox, that's fine, but make sure you're asking a checkbox question. If it's a radio button, that's fine, but make sure you're asking a radio button a single selected question. So we do have a lot of question types for reason, because they're beneficial to collect different types of data, but you need to make sure that the question or the question stem matches up with the kind of question type that you're using as well. Confusing presentation order hurts the flow, makes people unsure about why you're having this kind of rambling conversation. And the same thing with answer order. If you don't have a reason why your answers are in that order, rethink that, right? Like if there's no good reason, for example, if it's on a scale from negative to positive, for example, that makes sense. Consistency is important. If you don't have a better reason, or if you don't have a reason like sequential, chronological, anything like that, just put them in alphabetical order. It'll make it easier for people to find what they're looking for. A really great way to disengage your participants is with missing answer options. Especially imagine that you ask me, okay, well, we're doing data collection across different schools in our district. Which school do you work at? And you don't have the school that I work at. Like, I'm going to drop out of your survey right away. So that's an unfortunate one. Very easy to disengage. Again, back to a bit of the technical side. When people choose the wrong text box size or allow too few or too many characters. When there's a mismatch here, if you have a large box, you create that large box, you drag and drop it down on the bottom right-hand corner. Make sure you're giving your participants enough characters, that is, enough text, so that they can answer the questions as you've presented them. If when you have a large box and a small number of characters, it's a visual mismatch, it's confusing, just as when you have a small box and a large number of characters. If people can't see what they're typing, or they can see but they can't keep typing, it's a lot of frustration there. No directions. This is in terms of introductory text, again, is very useful, but giving some clarity on what should people be considering, what should they be thinking about in a particular section, or should they be responding to a specific experience or situation. Ambiguous language is a terrible situation in both directions and questions and answers. Cannot say enough about how challenging this is. Even when you get into jargon and abbreviations, just because you know your audience, hopefully you know the kind of jargon that they use, but using clear language is always better than relying on assumptions. Ugly images, things that don't look good, and just an ugly design in the first place. But my number one for me personally, my background is as an English teacher, typos. Typos make me crazy. There are a number of these things that you can't change once the survey goes live, but typos are not one of them. In almost every case, you can change the survey typos to accurate text. That's an easy fix in most cases. So unless it's in your invitation, it's sitting in someone's inbox, you do have control over some of these things, even after the survey is live, and that's one of them. But obviously, we're looking at the impression that's created. So you are creating a certain impression every time you make one of these, we'll call them mistakes. No introduction or welcome. It sounds like you are in a hurry. You don't have time for it. You don't know why you're doing it either. You're just going through the motions if there's no clear purpose. Mandatory questions, too many come off as pushy. Like, for too many questions, perhaps you, the designer, are really bored, so you're just asking a lot of questions. Or the nicer way to look at that is you're just very creative. Either way, your participant still has that feeling that there's too many. Too many personal questions can be seen as invasive and rude if they're irrelevant. Confusing, incorrect question types means that you appear to be confused as well or unclear. Same with presentation order, same with answer order. Missing answer options comes across as well as careless. You aren't paying attention to the people who are participating, you aren't paying attention to their experience, and you don't know them well enough. Same thing with wrong text box size, you're just not paying attention to details. You don't care if they don't have directions, you're not worried about whether they participate appropriately. Ambiguous language means probably you are of some two minds as well. You might be disoriented, distracted. Something with jargon or abbreviations comes across as unclear. You're not communicating effectively, or insular. You are talking to only the in-group, only the cool kids who understand exactly your terminology or abbreviations. Always a good idea to clarify those. Attractive or missized images means that you are just rushing to get it done. Ugly design is you just don't care. Typos often come across as lazy. So probably you can think of your own list of all of the things that people come across, that you come across in people's surveys. Never your own surveys. Your own surveys, we all put out the best that we can. But upon consideration, a lot of these are issues that we find across many, many projects that we encounter. So things that you should do, things that you should keep in mind. Of course, there's a positive spin here. There are a lot of things that you could do. Of course, basically the opposite of all of the don'ts that we just said. But the thing to think about here, I've organized these into 5 key priorities. Reporting up top, of course, even though it's the end of your process, it should drive everything. Audience, purpose, engagement, and appearance. So because we are trying to keep you engaged, of course, give a few GIFs along the way. Reporting is one of the most important pieces in the process, and I know that I just said that that's the same for design as well. But if you start with the report in mind, you start with this end in mind, you are going to have a more effective, better designed survey from the very beginning. The best way to do that is to think about who wants the data and what they need to know. When you start to think about the way that audience wants to see your reports, is it divided by department? Is it by location? Is it segregated into positions or tenure, anything like that? Knowing all of those key questions that you're going to want to know both the answers to and who answered them differently So that is content questions and demographic questions as well. Knowing how you're going to need to present it gives you clues about how you need to ask the questions, not only the order, but the content as well. So end in mind, purpose, of course, too, as I've already mentioned. If you don't have a clear purpose, your participants are very unlikely to, become participants. They're very unlikely to complete your project. They're probably not going to open it in the first place. So when you start off with a clear purpose, hopefully it's not, because we always do this in September. Like, that's not a great purpose. Finding out, even if that's, why it's come to your attention, maybe it's just been put on your lap of, hey, you're in charge of this now. Really getting to the crux of the matter. Why are we doing this? What was the original purpose? Helps you to narrow down what is included. It is very easy to have lots and lots of stuff added. Say, for example, you're doing a customer satisfaction survey. If that's supposed to be a quick hit, a quick check-in about overall, for example, NPS or customer satisfaction, CSAT scores, that's a great place to start. However, once you start to share this with other stakeholders internally, they might say, we should also have a question. We should also have a question about this. And wouldn't it be nice to know? Of course, it's always nice to know. Everyone wants more information. And it's a great idea to build a consensus around what conversations you should be having with your stakeholders, with those different participant groups at different times. However, one conversation at a time is usually best. You can get away with a little extra through logic, branching. We'll come back to that in engagement. But the overall driving purpose needs to be very clear and consistent throughout. Otherwise, you're asking irrelevant questions, the order doesn't make sense, people can't figure out what you're going for, and they're much more likely to drop out. So this is helpful for you as well as for your participants. It allows you to make some decisions along the way. Audience, this is the only one that's static because this is sometimes how it feels as well. We're very excited, we're going out, we're sending all of these projects and all these questions out, but it all relies on our audience. So one of the best ways to engage your audience, of course, is to know who they are, what they already know about this, why they should care about this, and what their engagement level is with this topic already. So starting to think about this in both the content as well as your distribution plan. What's the best time to reach them? What's the best way to reach them? We all know we have people in our lives and in our organizations. Well, if I need to reach this person, it's on WhatsApp. If I need to reach this person, it's an SMS. If I need to reach that person, I better just show up at their door. So making sure that you know the best way that's feasible, of course, to be able to connect with each of your audience members, each of your participant groups, can help to drive the content, make sure that it's clear up front, give you some clarity in maybe the invitation itself or additional communication that you're doing as well to let people know, hey, this is coming up. Not just putting all of that pressure on that single email invitation itself, for example, but letting the rest of the communication that they're receiving either from you or from others in your organization, letting them know consistently, this is coming, it's important, here's how we're going to use it. And engagement coming toward the end of this session. That's the big question. Are you still there? Keeping it short, getting directly to the point. You don't see a lot of slides here. You see us getting directly to the point here. Conversational flow is really important. I've mentioned a few times. That questionnaire should feel like something that you could sit down and ask people in that order in a reasonable amount of time. Variety of question types, of course, it's used for collecting the right kind of data, but it also keeps participants engaged to see those similar rating scale, image choice, drill down. A lot of those more advanced question types doesn't mean they're difficult to use, but a little bit more complex interaction options that people have, especially on their phone. Think about the media, how that's displaying, how it looks, not just showing off, not just junking things up, but making it more engaging and interactive. We know that too much effort and engagement is super distracting. Like, how much longer can you look at these friends jumping up and down, of course. It can be really distracting, but the goal is, of course, to get people engaged and keep them moving forward. One of the fastest ways, one of the best ways to keep people moving forward is to pre-fill their answers for them. That's a great way, pre-population, of course, and using logic, whether it's question display logic, or branching or telematrix, any of these options, piping, these sorts of things as well. Also keep your participants engaged throughout, keeping them with relevant questions, focusing on the exact kinds of things you want them to be responding on and nothing else. And yes, appearance, looks really do matter. Helps with recognition, whether it's an internal or an external project. Your employees should, get good-looking, polished projects as well too, with invitations and surveys that matches logos for the organization or for the project, for example. If you have a style guide, you should definitely follow it. If you don't have a style guide, create your own, I would say, is probably one of the best practices to make sure that your project looks consistent. That you can save a visual settings style, you can save an email template. So some things there so you have some consistency, especially the first 2 times around. Don't get too carried away. It is quite possible to have such an exciting looking background, for example, that no one can actually see your questions. So this is pretty critical, actually. If you get so excited about appearance and at a certain point you might realize no one is able to respond, and that's obviously going to hurt your response rate. It's going to hurt the data that you're able to collect along the way. And so finally, testing. Testing is something that's really important throughout all of these, but I've left it here with appearance because if people can't read it, if it's not accessible, whether it's ADA compliance or just colors, for example, all of these things are really, really important in order to be able to ultimately connect with your participants and ideally collect some data. So testing, not just from you, not just from other people who are vested in that data, who are really driven to participate, but others. We'll call them the random passersby, the sort of guy on the street or the person on the corner here, asking them, getting feedback from the people around you about their experience taking this survey. Do they understand the language? Is the appearance clear enough? Do they get the purpose? All of those things are really important in terms of testing. So the broadest testing audience that you can get in a reasonable amount of time, that's a really, really helpful piece of advice here. So I've put it at the end. So I know that there are lots and lots of other design best practices that you practice as well too. This is certainly not an all-encompassing list. It's a good starting point. So there are a lot of other things we could get into about, quality of questions specifically. Are we doing leading questions, double-barreled questions, any kinds of other logical fallacies? So there are lots and lots of pieces that we could add in here. And I would love to hear from you. So if you have some questions or suggestions, you can always drop us a note here. You can visit us online. You can go to our website, SoGoSurvey.com. You can also reach out to me here, experience@SoGoSurvey.com, and send your feedback. So your responses could be here in our next iteration of this conversation. So thanks so much for joining. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.